What if you looked at your life right now and realized that something is out of place? As if everything inside feels broken, without structure, without direction, without clarity for the next step. This is exactly the kind of moment that prepares the heart to understand the depth of the biblical story of Neemias. Because before reconstruction, there is confrontation, that moment when you realize you can no longer pretend everything is fine. No structure, no direction, no hope. Strong words, but maybe they describe exactly what you're living today. And there's no point in masking it, no point in distracting your mind when something is broken. It needs to be faced. The biblical story of Neemias begins right here, when reality can no longer be ignored. And the question echoes clearly, without hesitation: what are you going to do about it? Would you give up, or would you decide to rebuild? Because that decision changes everything. Many people stop halfway, accept chaos as normal, and get used to disorder. But Neemias didn't do that. And here's the point: God did not call you to live among ruins. There is something inside you that knows this. There is a discomfort that won't let you stay the same, and it's not there by accident. Maybe you're looking at areas of your life that feel collapsed, paused dreams, weakened faith, wrong decisions. And just like in the biblical story of Neemias, everything begins with an honest look. No escape, no excuses. Because until you recognize what is broken, you won't move to rebuild. Now tell me, will you keep ignoring it, or will you make a decision today? Because this is just the beginning. And if this message is already speaking to you, then go ahead and subscribe to the channel, because what comes next might be exactly what you need to start rebuilding your life. Neemias receives news, and it's not just any kind of news. It's the kind that pierces the heart and stirs everything inside. Jerusalem, the city that represented purpose, identity, and faith, was in ruins. Broken walls, burned gates, a scene of total abandonment. And within the biblical story of Neemias, this wasn't just about fallen stones. It was about a people exposed, vulnerable, without protection. What once was security had now become fragility. What once represented strength now signaled shame. And Neemias understands something many people overlook. When the walls fall, it's not just the outside that suffers. The inside is affected too. Because in the biblical story, the walls of Jerusalem were not merely physical. They symbolized boundaries, identity, and relationship with God. And maybe you've never stopped to think about it, but life also has walls, boundaries that protect your mind, your faith, your decisions. When those walls are strong, you can say no to what tries to destroy you. But when they're broken, everything gets in. Doubt, fear, anxiety, wrong influences. And suddenly, what once was stable starts to fall apart, almost without you noticing. Neemias didn't hear that news as something distant. He felt it. He understood its weight. And that already reveals a powerful principle from the biblical story of Neemias. Transformation begins when you stop treating the problem as something small. When you recognize that it needs attention, care, and action. It's not exaggeration, it's awareness. And this is where many people get stuck. Because recognizing reality requires maturity. But Neemias didn't stop at hearing. Something began to move within him. And what he did next reveals the next step for those who refuse to live among ruins. Neemias could have simply ignored it, gone on with his life, pretending it had nothing to do with him. After all, he was in a comfortable position. But in the biblical story of Neemias, something different happens. He cannot remain indifferent. There is a weight, an uneasiness, a silent calling that won't let him rest. And here is an important point. Not every discomfort is bad. Sometimes it's God waking you up. He weeps, and it's not a superficial kind of crying. It's deep, genuine brokenness. He prays, not out of obligation, but because he understands he cannot do it alone. And then he takes a stand. Notice the sequence. Feel, seek God, and act. The biblical story of Neemias shows that rebuilding doesn't begin with tools. It begins with a heart aligned. And that changes everything about how someone faces their problems. Rebuilding requires a decision. It's not a momentary emotion, it's a firm choice. And maybe that's exactly what many people are missing today. People who feel, who get emotional, but never move forward. Neemias felt it, but he didn't stop there. He understood that ignoring the problem wouldn't make it disappear. In fact, it would only make the consequences worse, and that applies to every area of life. Maybe you're looking at situations like this right now. Broken relationships, a disorganized life, weakened faith, things you know need attention, but for some reason have been pushed aside. The biblical story of Neemias confronts this directly. You can't delay it any longer. Time does not fix what requires a decision. And it's at this point that everything begins to shift, because Neemias doesn't stay in the feeling. He decides to take a step. And that decision, even surrounded by fear and uncertainty, opens the way for something greater, something that starts small but carries a massive impact. Neemias decides to act. He no longer stays only in his feelings. He doesn't remain just in prayer. He rises. Even with fear, even without having all the answers, he takes the first step. And here is something powerful in the biblical story of Neemias. Courage is not the absence of fear, it is the decision in spite of it. He understands that waiting for the perfect moment is often just a disguised excuse. Even with opposition, he begins to rebuild, stone by stone. No rush, but no stopping either. Because anyone who truly rebuilds understands that it's not about speed, it's about consistency. And this applies directly to life. Organizing your routine, restoring your faith, rebuilding relationships. All of this requires small, consistent steps. Neemias didn't try to fix everything at once. He simply started. And it wasn't easy. Criticism arose, people tried to discourage him, voices said it wouldn't work. In the biblical story of Neemias, whenever someone decides to rise, resistance appears. It's almost as if progress bothers those who have grown comfortable with destruction. But Neemias did not negotiate with those voices. He remained focused on what needed to be done. There were attacks, attempts to distract him, invitations to stop. And here is a practical lesson. Not every opportunity deserves your attention. Many times, what seems urgent is just a distraction trying to pull you away from your purpose. Neemias understood this clearly. He did not come down from the wall. He did not abandon the mission. He kept going, even when it would have been easier to stop. And this perseverance begins to produce results, because every consistent rebuilding starts to show signs. But what this biblical story still reveals goes beyond human effort. Because there comes a moment when it's not just about rebuilding on the outside. There is something deeper that also needs to be restored. And this is where the biblical story of Neemias points to something greater. Something beyond walls, beyond cities, beyond human effort. Because at the core, the biggest problem was never just what was destroyed on the outside. It was what was misaligned on the inside. And if you look closely, you'll realize that many times the external scenario is only a reflection of the interior. Because there are ruins that no one sees, a tired heart, weakened faith, a mind full of doubts. And no matter how much someone tries to rebuild with discipline, willpower, or good intentions, there comes a point where that is not enough. The biblical story reveals this in a subtle way. There is a limit to what human effort can accomplish. That's why you don't just need rebuilding, you need transformation. And this is exactly where Christ comes in. Because He doesn't come merely to help organize what is messy. He comes to fully restore. He reaches what no one else can reach. He touches what no one else can touch. While Neemias rebuilt walls, Jesus rebuilds lives. While Neemias raised structures, Christ restores identities. And this is the difference that changes everything. Because it's not just about going back to what it used to be, but becoming something new, something aligned, strong, complete. something that does not break easily. And maybe you've been trying to do this on your own, trying to fix, organize, and restart in your own way. But there is an invitation here, an invitation to go beyond human effort. Because when Christ enters the story, rebuilding takes on a whole new meaning. Maybe you're looking at your life right now, and all you can see are ruins. Things out of place, decisions that weigh on you, areas that seem beyond repair. But the biblical story of Neemias makes one thing very clear. Ruins are not the end. They are just the starting point for those who decide to rebuild, but not just in any way. Because there is something you cannot ignore. It is impossible to rebuild a solid life without a true foundation. And that foundation has a name: Jesus Christ. He is not one option among many. He is the only way. He is not just someone who helps in the process. He is the center of transformation. Without him, any rebuilding will be temporary. Maybe you've already tried doing it your way, tried to change habits, restart, organize everything on your own. But it always feels like something is missing, like it doesn't last. That's because true transformation begins in the heart, and only Jesus has the power to fully restore what is broken inside. The biblical story of Neemias points to this. There is something deeper than just rebuilding the outside. Today, there is an invitation in front of you, a real invitation, not to try again on your own, but to surrender your life to Christ, to recognize that you need him, to turn your heart toward him and accept Jesus as your one and only sufficient Savior. This is the beginning of a new story, not built on your effort, but on his grace. And the decision is in your hands right now. You can keep looking at the ruins, or you can begin to rebuild, grounding your life in Jesus. Because when he enters the story, everything changes. And what once seemed impossible finally begins to be restored. He saw everything destroyed and still chose to rebuild. Not because it was easy, not because he had all the answers, but because he understood that staying in the ruins was not an option. And that's what makes the biblical story of Neemias so powerful. The decision to rise changes everything. And now, the question is for you. What are you going to do with what you've been seeing in your life? What needs to be rebuilt? Because recognizing it is the first step, but continuing the journey is what truly transforms the story. And that's exactly why you don't need to stop here. There are other videos on this channel that will help you strengthen your faith, better understand God's purpose, and continue this rebuilding process with more clarity and direction. So, take this moment, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and keep watching the next videos. Because the more you feed your faith, the stronger you become in the process.